successful and a holding against at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident of the packet of grenades. But then, no comment. Perhaps we will continue to keep you informed.
Before Roswell, before the term UFO, one man saw something fall from the sky, and others came to erase it. June 21st, 1947. Something strange would break the silence over the Puget Sound, north of Tacoma, Washington. A ripple in the fabric of reality that would come to haunt the edges of American history, like smoke curling from a gun barrel. It had already been a year cut from surreal cloth. Nat King Cole crooned "I Love You" for sentimental reasons through dusty radio speakers in kitchens and corner diners. His voice the soundtrack to a country trying to remember how to feel after the bloodbath of World War II. But the sentiment was just a lullaby to distract from the growing noise underneath. The static building in the air, the quiet fear that the war had ended but the monsters it birthed were still breathing. Somewhere between the ruins of Europe and the blinking lights of Times Square, fruit flies and fragile plants were strapped inside of the carcass of a Nazi V-2 rocket, now rebranded as American Ambition. The stolen war machine screamed through the atmosphere, reaching 108 kilometers above the Earth, crossing the line into space with a payload of tiny life forms who didn't know they were making history. The first creatures launched beyond Earth's atmosphere by the United States. They returned safely beneath a trembling parachute, but not all creatures sent heavenward would be so lucky. The fruit flies lived, but what followed was a long procession of silence. Dogs, monkeys, rodents, chimps, a menagerie of unwilling pioneers blasted into the void and returned as ashes and twisted metal, or not at all. Each failed landing was another experiment scribbled in blood. The Cold War was just beginning, but the bodies were already piling up. The world was moving fast. Too fast. Rocket fuel and uranium dreams. Men in suits whispered about progress while their shadows spoke of annihilation. The war had ended with a mushroom cloud and a countdown. Now every newspaper headline seemed like prophecy. And then came the real fear. Not what we were building, but what might already be watching. The skies were getting crowded. Not with airplanes or satellites, but with things that didn't belong. Shapes without wings. Lights with no source. Objects that moved like they were being piloted by a different kind of logic. People started to look up and wonder if we were alone. Not in the poetic, starry-eyed sense, but in the cold, clinical dread that something else might be crossing our thresholds without knocking. And on that gray summer day in June over the Puget Sound, just off the coast of Maury Island, something descended from above. Something that would leave behind fire, fear, and a warning dressed in a black suit. The wind rolled in low and quiet, brushing the black waters near Maury Island, where two men were working under government contract, patrolling driftwood and hauling logs in the name of conservation. Or maybe just killing time in a post-war America that didn't know what peace was supposed to feel like. Fred Crisman, the supervisor, stayed back. Harold Dahl, the grunt, was out on the water with his teenage son, the family dog curled up on board, part of the crew as the boat sliced through cold waves like a scalpel. It was supposed to be just another day of honest work in a country that had stopped believing in honest anything. Then the sky broke open. According to Dahl, 6 objects appeared overhead. Not planes, not weather balloons. Donut-shaped machines, metal and impossible, drifting in a wide formation, like vultures too dignified to flap their wings. One of them shuddered in midair, like a drunk losing its footing. Then it fell. Not completely, just enough to make the others look less like ships and more like something alive. And then came the debris. It wasn't just falling. It was raining metal, slag, shards of something not meant to be built by human hands. It hit the water with hissing fury. Some of it struck the boat. A chunk caught Dahl's son, cut him open. Not bad enough to kill, but deep enough to scar. Unfortunately, the dog wasn't so lucky. It died howling, its body mangled by whatever had fallen from the sky. Part of the hull blistered with heat. The smell of burnt fur and singed wood tangled in the air like ghosts too angry to leave. And then it was gone. The broken craft limped back into formation, and together the 6 vanished into the horizon. leaving behind a trail of silence and smoke. Dahl, shaking, did the only thing that made sense in the moment. He grabbed his camera, snapped photos, collected fragments, evidence, proof that reality had snapped in half right there over the sound. He took the photos to Fred Crisman, the man up the ladder. Crisman didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He went to the site himself. A former World War II pilot with rumored intelligence ties, Crisman wasn't just a paper-pushing supervisor. He was the kind of man who knew how to keep secrets and recognized when he was standing too close to one. Years later, his name would surface again in the murky orbit of the JFK assassination files, subpoenaed for testimony in a case that never fully came to light. But here, in 1947, he claimed he found it, wreckage scattered like breadcrumbs through driftwood and rock, the kind of evidence that didn't fit into any tidy box marked weather balloon, the fingerprints of something the military might call experimental and others might call extraterrestrial. Either way, it wasn't supposed to be there. Then came the morning. 6 a.m., the sun barely awake, when Harold Dahl opened his front door to find a man in a black suit waiting on the other side. No smile, no badge, just cold eyes and a colder voice. The stranger invited himself in without asking, said he just wanted to talk. They went out to breakfast. In a booth at some nameless diner that smelled like burnt coffee and moral compromise, the man started speaking. And what he said rattled Dahl to the core. He knew everything. The objects, the injury, the dead dog, the photographs, even the moment Dahl had bent to scoop a chunk of otherworldly debris from the boat's scorched deck.
You saw something you weren't meant to see,
the man said, between bites of toast and quiet menace.
and I know more about it than you'll ever want to believe.
No threats, just certainty. He urged Dahl, warned him, stay quiet. Forget it ever happened.
Talking won't help you. It won't help your boy either. The wisest thing you can do
Let's let this go.
The subtext wasn't subtext. It was a loaded gun sitting in the middle of the table disguised as a conversation. The man in black left the diner the way he came, without sound, without name. But his presence stuck to Dahl like the smell of gunpowder after a shot fired in the dark. That was the moment everything changed. Because once you meet a man who already knows your nightmare, you stop dreaming. You start watching your back. They called it a public investigation, but it felt more like a quiet execution of credibility. When the press and the military started poking around the so-called Maury Island Incident, the cracks showed fast. Harold Dahl and Fred Crisman, once dock workers and log chasers, had suddenly become amateur ufologists, reporters of the unexplainable. But they said their stories didn't line up. They said they wobbled. They contradicted. Said the lines blurred between what might have been trauma and what sounded suspiciously like a sales pitch. Some suspected the whole thing had been dressed up for the pulp circuit. Maybe Dahl and Crisman thought they could land a spread in Fantasy Magazine or Amazing Adventures, cashing in on the post-war hysteria, where atomic science and nightmares shared the same bed. After all, despite the alleged warnings from the man in black, they didn't exactly keep their mouths shut. Instead, they told their stories with the loose confidence of men who either hadn't been threatened at all or didn't think the threats were credible. But if it was a hoax, what came next didn't fit the script. Just 3 days later, on June 24th, a different man flying a different sky caught sight of something that made the Maury Island Incident seem suddenly
Plausible.
His name was Kenneth Arnold, a seasoned pilot, respected, rational, not a man inclined toward fantasy. He wasn't out looking for UFOs. He was flying a business trip from Chehalis to Yakima, Washington. But Arnold was also the kind of man who believed in duty. When he heard there was a downed Marine Corps C-46 transport missing in the Cascades, he decided to take a detour and scan the terrain. It was a noble gesture. It was also a dead end. Near 3 p.m., with no wreckage in sight, Arnold turned his plane east again, back on course, back to reality. So we thought. But apparently reality had already begun to slip. It started with a flash, a bright, unnatural glint in the sky just outside his window. He scanned for its source and spotted a DC-4 aircraft trailing far behind him, but that wasn't it. The light came again, exactly 30 seconds later, from the same part of the sky. He checked his glasses, moved the plane side to side, rubbed the window. He did everything a sane man does when he's trying to prove he's not seeing what he's seeing. But the light stayed. They were real. Arnold squinted in the haze and saw them. 9 metallic objects dancing in the sky like silver coins dropped onto invisible waves. They were flying in a diagonal formation, moving with a speed and smoothness that didn't belong to jet engines or propellers. No wings, no sound, just geometry and motion. As they passed in front of Mount Rainier, the snowy backdrop turned them into silhouettes, convex discs flipping erratically. One of them, Arnold noted, had a crescent shape, breaking formation like a drunk at a military parade. Then it snapped back into line. He later described the movement as being like a Chinese kite in a stiff wind. Others said it sounded like he was describing saucers skipping across water. That's the phrase that stuck, though. Flying saucers. A new term was born, and with it the birth of a cultural obsession born not from fantasy but from the dry, measured words of a man with no reason to lie. Arnold did the math. The objects were moving fast. 1,900 kilometers per hour, give or take a few seconds of disbelief. Too fast for anything that should have been flying in 1947. Too fast for the truth to catch up. And though his mind leaned toward a military explanation, some secret U.S. Air Force tech being tested under the radar, it didn't sit right. These weren't test flights. These were ghosts on a mission. Calculated. Coordinated. Watching. The newspapers ate it up. Arnold's story went nationwide, igniting the UFO craze that would define a generation of paranoia, wonder, and Cold War fear. But while the media chased saucers and skeptics sharpened their pencils, Arnold himself kept circling back to Maury Island. He decided to meet with Crisman and Dahl. He listened. And when he looked into their eyes, he didn't see charlatans. Dahl, still rattled, looked like a man who'd seen something he couldn't scrub from his eyes. Crisman was colder. Calmer. Too calm, maybe. The former pilot with government whispers behind his name, he didn't offer wild theories or outbursts, just facts, laid out like classified documents on a dimly lit table. Arnold believed them, not because the story made sense, but because men like Fred Crisman didn't get involved unless something was burning behind the curtain. So he went to the Air Force, offering not just his account but theirs. He laid everything out on the table. Strange metal, strange men, and the kinds of truths that don't survive government filing cabinets. He didn't do it for fame. He did it because, as he said,
I made my report because I thought it was my duty. It was the only proper and American thing to do. I saw what I saw.
And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. You just start wondering who else saw it too, and who's working overtime to make sure you never see it again. The Air Force came in quiet, like shadows with credentials. A few men, a few words, clipboards, handshakes colder than a body on a slab. They dispatched 2 men from Hamilton Field in California, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, intelligence officers with experience, rank, and enough steel in their nerves to investigate the unknown. They met with Dahl and Crisman, interviewed him, took possession of the debris, the dark, heavy slag that had torn through the boat and burned itself into Dahl's memory. They boxed it up and boarded a B-25 headed back to base, but the men never made it. On August 1st, 1947, their plane went down near Kelso, Washington. Both men were killed. The official cause? An engine fire. Another crash in a summer already full of them. Afterward, the military quietly closed the case. The material, they claimed, was nothing but smelter slag, the byproduct of nearby industrial work. Common. Unremarkable. The whole thing, they said, was likely a hoax. But even that verdict had its own burn. If it was all just a joke, why did it take 2 dead men to end it? Then when Kenneth Arnold's report hit the airwaves like a punch to the gut, the military fell back on tried and true tactics. Deny and wrap everything in red tape like a toddler playing with a Christmas ribbon. The Air Force Material Command issued its verdict with bureaucratic precision.
The report cannot bear even superficial examination, therefore it must be disregarded.
Translation: we didn't see it, and you didn't either. Another internal document filed the whole event away under the convenient label of
Mirage.
9 metal discs skipping across the sky like stones on a lake, each flashing sunlight like a blade, dismissed with a wave of a pen. But the skies weren't done talking. On July 4th, just days later, the fireworks weren't all down here on Earth. Captain Emil Smith, a commercial airline pilot flying an American Airlines DC-3 just outside Boise, Idaho, had a front row seat to something unexplainable. At 8,000 feet with nothing but open air and engine hum, he and his co-pilot saw two formations of disc-shaped objects cut through the sky like scalpels through gauze. 5 in the first wave, 4 in the next. The discs matched the plane's pace for 10 to 15 minutes. A silent parade of technology or terror that danced just close enough to be seen, but far enough to remain untouchable and unknown. Smith described them as flat on the bottom, rounded on the top. Not birds, not flares, not clouds, but machines. And when they were done playing witness, they vanished at impossible speed, leaving only silence in their wake and 2 pilots wondering if the sky had grown teeth. But the real punchline in the summer of saucers came not from the sky, but from the dust and dirt of a sheep pasture just outside Roswell, New Mexico. A rancher, unnamed and remote, found something strange littered across his land. Metallic debris, scorched earth, and the quiet weight of history pressing in from all sides. He couldn't call it in, no phone. So he did what people did back then, just waited. And when he finally reached someone, it wasn't long before the army came knocking. And then for a brief moment, the truth got out. On July 8th, headlines screamed across the country.
Army reveal it has flying disc found on ranch in New Mexico.
The official announcement came from Lieutenant Walter Haught, public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield. According to him, the disc had been removed, secured, and turned over to military custody, courtesy of Jesse Marcel, an intelligence officer from the 509th Bomb Group. A flying disc, not a theory, not a hallucination, a fact. But the truth had a short shelf life. Within a day, the story changed. Suddenly, the disc wasn't a disc. It was a weather balloon. Nothing to see here. Move along. Years later, they'd admit it was part of Project Mogul, a high-altitude balloon meant to monitor nuclear tests. That version had paperwork, diagrams, just enough red tape to tangle the memory, but no explanation, official or otherwise, ever accounted for the 8 shining saucers and 1 half-moon object that danced across the skies of Washington and Idaho that summer. No weather balloon moved like that. No test rig flipped like the tail of a Chinese kite, and no mirage cast a shadow on the mountains. As for Kenneth Arnold, he bought a video recorder, dragged it in every cockpit, hoping lightning would strike twice. It never did. As the years passed, the glow faded, but the questions didn't. He once said,
If the Army has no explanation, then the discs must be, and I know this sounds crazy,
From another planet.
the press called him a lunatic. Some preachers called him a prophet. One apparently told him the end was near, that the discs were signs of the apocalypse, and he was the messenger. A woman in a Pendleton cafe saw him and screamed, "That's the man who saw the men from Mars!" Then she fled in tears, whispering about her children. Arnold didn't ask for this. He didn't want to be a myth. He just looked up one day and saw something. In a world where the sky has secrets, the most dangerous thing a man can do
Is look up.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dancing Toaster for another Out of This World episode, episode 24 to be exact. Nelly here, coming back at you with some wild stories from my own backyard, more Washington State high strangeness, folks. Our focus today, as much as I just threw at you, is the Maury Island Incident, a strange early chapter in America's modern UFO history. Some have labeled it Case 47001. It's a designation that has appeared in books, TV dramatizations, and certain online UFO databases, but here's the truth. While the incident was investigated by the FBI, Army Air Force Intelligence, and is occasionally referenced in relation to Project Blue Book, it was never officially assigned a case number like 47001 in any known government document. In all likelihood, the label was added later by UFO historians or storytellers to mark it as the first major UFO incident of 1947. The one that came just 3 days before Kenneth Arnold's flying saucers and just weeks before Roswell. The Kenneth Arnold event is of course where the term flying saucer originated. Now, one of the things I love about my toasties, some of you are initiated, while others are uninitiated. Now, what do I mean? I love that for a lot of you, the dancing toaster is your first swim in the pool of high strangeness. A very exciting fact for me. I feel like Aladdin taking you on your first carpet ride. A whole new world. Oh, no, I don't want Disney coming after me. But I also know that many of you are familiar with these stories and accounts and terminology. I'm going to do my best to appeal to both groups, as I always try to do, but it can be a Herculean task for sure. On June 24th, 1947, Arnold was flying his private plane near Mount Rainier, Washington, when he reported seeing 9 bright crescent-shaped objects flying in a diagonal formation at incredible speed. He estimated over 1,900 kilometers per hour. That's about 1,200 miles per hour. He described the objects as skipping like saucers across water. Though the objects were more crescent or boomerang-shaped, reporters fixed on his description of the motion, and that's where the term flying saucer was born. But before this famous moment in UFO history is the often forgotten Maury Island Incident. On June 21st, 1947, just off the coast of Tacoma, Washington, in the murky waters of the Puget Sound, one of the most peculiar and hotly debated UFO incidents in American history took place. It's considered by many researchers to be the first major UFO-related event of the modern era. But this wasn't just another lights in the sky report. This story had everything: unidentified flying objects, deadly debris, injured witnesses, mysterious government agents, and perhaps most chilling of all, one of the earliest encounters with what we now call the Men in Black. To this day, no one can say with certainty what really happened. Was it a hoax, a military cover-up, or something far stranger than either? The central figure in this story is a man named Harold Dahl, a harbor patrolman working for a local logging company. On the afternoon of the 21st, Dahl was patrolling the waters near Maury Island, accompanied by his teenage son Charles, their dog, and 2 other crew members. It was just another routine outing until around 2 p.m. The sky overhead reportedly filled with 6 massive metallic donut-shaped objects flying in loose formation. According to Dahl's later account, one of the crafts appeared to be malfunctioning or damaged. It began to emit what he described as metallic debris which rained down on their boat and the surrounding water with terrifying speed and intensity. The falling slag-like material caused real harm. Dahl's son, Charles, was reportedly injured by the fragments, and more tragically, their dog was killed. Portions of the boat itself were also burned or otherwise damaged by the molten-like debris. Dahl claimed that he snapped photos of the objects and gathered some of the fallen material as evidence. After discharging its payload of debris, the damaged object rejoined the other 5 crafts. Together, the 6 UFOs allegedly formed back in formation and departed the scene in total silence, leaving behind confusion, pain, and wreckage. What followed the next day deepened the mystery further. Dahl claimed he was approached by a strange man dressed in a black suit, a figure who would later become iconic in UFO mythology. According to Dahl, this man invited him to breakfast at a local diner where he made cryptic statements indicating that he already knew all the previous day's events. What Dahl had seen, the damage done, and even the injuries sustained by his son. The man didn't threaten him outright, but issued a cold warning.
You'd be wise to forget what you saw.
This encounter is widely regarded as the first documented Men in Black event, occurring before the term even existed in public consciousness. The incident might have remained in local curiosity if not for what happened next. As noted, just 3 days later, on June 24th, pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing the 9 flying disc-shaped objects speeding past Mount Rainier. His sighting would go on to spark the national UFO craze and give birth to the term flying saucers. However, before Arnold made his report public, he was contacted by Ray Palmer, editor of Amazing Stories magazine, a pulp publication fascinated by the supernatural and paranormal. Palmer encouraged Arnold to investigate the Maury Island event, suspecting that it might be connected to what he himself had seen. Intrigued, Arnold traveled to Washington where he met Harold Dahl and his employer Fred Crisman, a man who would later gain attention in conspiracy circles for his alleged intelligence ties and involvement in other bizarre cases. Arnold, Dahl, and Crisman then involved the military. 2 Army Air Force intelligence officers from Hamilton Field in California, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, were flown in to examine the case.
They interviewed the witnesses, collected the supposed UFO debris for transport back to California. However, on August 1st, shortly after taking off from McCord Field near Tacoma, the B-25 carrying the officers and the material crashed, killing both men. The military attributed the crash to an engine fire, but to this day speculation persists that the crash was no accident, that the debris may have been hazardous, or that the plane was sabotaged to keep something buried. The debris that was eventually recovered and analyzed was said to be industrial slag, the byproduct of metal smelting, a decidedly mundane material. This led many in official circles to conclude that the entire Maury Island episode had been a hoax, possibly intended to gain money or notoriety. Some also theorize that it may have been deliberate disinformation, designed to distract attention from actual military experiments being conducted in the region. But even that narrative raises more questions than it answers. If it was merely a hoax, why involve military intelligence? Why the immediate appearance of a mysterious man who knew more than he should? And how do we reconcile the fact that 2 military officers died trying to transport what was supposedly nothing more than industrial waste? The story took a stranger turn when Harold Dahl eventually recanted his account, saying it was all fabricated. But his retraction didn't close the case. Some researchers believe that Dahl was pressured or threatened into silence, perhaps by the same forces that sent the mysterious visitor in black. Others claim Fred Crisman had connections to intelligence agencies and may have manipulated the entire event for purposes that remain unclear to this day. Even the FBI conducted an investigation, ultimately labeling the case a publicity stunt, but questions about the strange behavior of the witnesses, the physical injuries, and the suspicious plane crash have kept the case alive in the minds of UFO historians and conspiracy theorists alike. Today, the Maury Island Incident is remembered as a case filled with contradictions and unresolved threads. It may be one of the earliest government cover-ups related to unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, and it introduced tropes that would later become staples of UFO folklore. Mysterious officials warning witnesses into silence, deadly crashes following attempts to reveal the truth, and evidence that disappears just when it's needed most. It's even directly tied to Kenneth Arnold, the man whose own sighting would set off the flying saucer craze, further blurring the line between coincidence and conspiracy. Whether the Maury Island Incident was a sloppy hoax, an accidental brush with something otherworldly, or a deliberate attempt to obscure deeper truths, it remains one of the most mystifying events in the early history of American UFO encounters. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions, not just about the skies, but about the structures of secrecy and control here on the ground. Was this the moment the cover-up culture began? Or was it the first crack in a much older, stranger veil? Now, if you watch UFO Hunters on History Channel, this event got its own episode, the first one in fact. In this episode, a comprehensive scientific investigation was done into the Maury Island UFO incident and the subsequent 1947 B-25 crash near Kelso. The investigations brought together a multidisciplinary team of researchers, including UFO investigators, divers, archaeologists, and many scientists. Their goal was to locate and analyze physical evidence, specifically the slag-like material reportedly ejected by a malfunctioning flying object over the Puget Sound, and to determine if this debris played a role in the military plane crash that occurred shortly after the incident. Recovery efforts focused on both Maury Island, where Dahl had claimed to witness the event, and the Kelso crash site, where those 2 Air Force officers died under suspicious circumstances while transporting the recovered material. Divers searched underwater while others collected debris from the beach and surrounding areas. Samples included porous, lava-like rocks that matched Dahl's description of the UFO slag, as well as metal fragments, rubber insulation, and soil from the wreckage of the B-25. Once the samples were secured, they were subjected to advanced laboratory testing. Dr. Ted Ackworth, a mechanical engineer affiliated with MIT, performed initial material identification, while Dr. Sam Iyengar, a metallurgist, carried out a battery of tests. These tests included X-ray diffraction, scanning electron microscopy, spectroscopy, and infrared analysis to determine the nature and composition of the collected samples. The material recovered from Maury Island, though visually consistent with witness descriptions, was ultimately identified as igneous rock, a naturally occurring volcanic formation, lightweight, porous, and aerated. It could easily have been mistaken for molten slag, especially under the traumatic and chaotic circumstances of the original sighting. Despite its dramatic appearance, scientists determined it to be geologically ordinary and not artificial or extraterrestrial in origin. At the Kelso crash site, however, the findings were slightly more intriguing. The recovered aluminum aircraft components displayed signs of extreme heat damage, including the presence of aluminum oxide, which forms only under high-temperature oxidation. Soil samples taken from around the B-25's engine also showed increased crystallinity, further indicating that the crash site had been subjected to intense heat, likely consistent with a violent onboard fire. To determine whether the so-called slag could have contributed to the plane's demise, researcher John Tyndall conducted a series of simulations. He demonstrated that slag-containing magnetic materials could potentially interfere with sensitive electrical relays aboard the B-25, leading to systemic failures. More significantly, he showed that slag burning at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit could easily melt aluminum, which has a much lower threshold of 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. The potential for a short circuit or fire sparked by this material, especially in the confined space of a cargo hold, was scientifically plausible and possibly catastrophic. In conclusion, the investigation did not uncover conclusive evidence that the slag was extraterrestrial in origin. However, the test did confirm that the physical characteristics of the material matched original witness reports and that it may have had the potential to disrupt aircraft systems or exacerbate a fire. The extensive heat damage found on both the aircraft wreckage and surrounding soil strongly supported the hypothesis that something beyond a routine mechanical failure occurred. While the composition of the slag may have been natural, the sequence of events, the sensitive military involvement, and the mysterious deaths of 2 Air Force officers raise enduring questions. Even after these investigations, the incident remains one of the most perplexing and possibly suppressed events in early UFO history. I'm not going to lie, the episode on History Channel was incredibly underwhelming. To sum it up, their findings were simply inconclusive. All that 45 minutes just to hear inconclusive. To discuss their findings, though, I'd like to bring on a brand new guest. Today we have Dr. William C.
Yes, hello. Well, thank you for having me. Just call me Will.
Dr. Will C. Well, welcome to the Dancing Toaster. I failed to ask my previous guest this, but just what are you a doctor of?
Well, Nellie, I have PhDs in parapsychology and psychology.
Very interesting, Doctor. I must say, you remind me of that guy from X-Files. He has a deep fascination with extraterrestrials as well. The recurring character Max Fennig. Are you familiar?
Oh, I'm familiar, and I find that rather derivative. Do you insult all your guests, Nellie?
Oh, he does.
Dr. Wright, what are you doing? No, you're not invited. Get out. The studio is barely big enough for the 2 of us, and it certainly won't fit a third, especially with a head so large.
See, I told you.
Bye, Dr. Wright.
Well, but what about...
No, get out. So sorry, Will, that's embarrassing. I laid out the findings of the investigations conducted by the History Channel teams. As a believer in the extraterrestrial point of view, what do you make of them?
Oh, so let me get this straight. They admit the material matched what witnesses described, porous, aerated, molten in appearance, but because it was technically volcanic rock, they tossed the entire thing out as natural. That's a classic move. It's always just volcanic rock, weather balloons, or swamp gas. Yet it appears at the exact place and time a UFO was seen dropping material from the sky, and it matched what all 4 witnesses described. Not just one person, but 4, including a teenager who was injured and a dog that died. And what about the plane crash? 2 intelligence officers die in a mysterious fire while transporting this so-called ordinary rock? A plane that had just been overhauled crashes 20 minutes after takeoff, and the best they can say is, well, there was a fire. Well, duh. That plane was sealed tight, guarded, and the military swooped in to recover wreckage and shut down photos. Why all the secrecy over some lava rocks? Let's also talk about the slag's potential. Even the scientists admitted it could have burned hot enough to melt aluminum and possibly short out relays. If the fire reached 4,000 degrees, well above what any onboard system could tolerate, then how is it inconclusive? You've got motive, mechanism, and aftermath.
But Doctor, didn't Dahl later recant his entire testimony?
Don't forget, Nellie, Dahl later recanted under pressure. He was visited by a man in black before the term was even around. He was told to shut up. Then his boss, Fred Crisman, later linked to shady intelligence operations. Come on, this entire case is dripping with the fingerprints of suppression.
But doctor, in all fairness, nothing found proved anything otherworldly.
They didn't find proof it was alien, fine, but they didn't disprove anything either. What they did prove is that the material was dangerous, that the plane's fire was intense and mysterious, and that the timeline aligns with a UFO sighting that was consistent, well documented, and immediately covered up. Call it what you want, Nellie, but if that wasn't a cover-up, it was the most conveniently timed sequence of coincidences in UFO history. And that's far harder to believe than the idea something non-human dumped hot debris on a patrol boat in the Puget Sound.
You do make a compelling case, Doctor, I'll give you this. If it was a cover-up, it was a well-rehearsed one, but here's the thing. We still have to deal with the material, evidence, or lack thereof. I'm not saying lava rocks aren't exciting, but they're certainly not spacecraft components. If you got a plane crash, yes. Intense heat, sure. But slag that might interfere with electrical relays is still a far cry from E.T. coming home, tossing scrap metal overboard. And come on, igneous rock doesn't show up on radar. If these things were physically there, hovering, maneuvering, reacting to pilots, then why does the only hard evidence we have look like something from Mount St. Helens? Now, I'm not denying something strange happened. I agree the timeline is weirdly tight. Dahl reports a sighting, Arnold sees discs, Roswell explodes, and suddenly we're knee-deep in saucers. But if we start calling every hot rock a UFO artifact, then what wouldn't count? So let me ask you this, Doctor. If the debris had been conclusively alien, what would you have expected to find? And if the real material never made it to the lab, where do you think it ended up?
Where do I think it ended up? Nellie, come on. You know as well as I do, if there was anything truly anomalous in that debris, it never made it to the lab. It never even made it out of the crash site. 2 intelligence officers go down in a plane after recovering UFO debris, and within hours the military swoops in, secures the wreckage, posts armed guards, and refuses to allow photographs? That's not standard protocol for volcanic rock. That's asset recovery, sir. And what would I have expected to find? I would have expected exactly what they didn't want anyone to see. Material with structural anomalies, isotopic ratios that don't match Earth samples, maybe even radiation signatures, but we never get to test the original samples, now do we? What we have is beach rocks decades later, after the scene had been scrubbed, sanitized, and spun into obscurity. You want a test result? Here's one. Harold Dahl saw 6 craft. 1 malfunctioned. It ejected slag. The moment it did, it stabilized and flew off with others. That sounds less like geology and more like technology. Maybe it was ballast, maybe it was damaged drive material. Either way, it served a function, a mechanical correction, right there in front of witnesses. And if you wouldn't count it as evidence, I'll tell you what doesn't count. Coincidence after coincidence wrapped in a classified file folder. When your only explanation is we couldn't prove it, that's not an answer, that's avoidance.
Okay, deep breaths, Doc, deep breaths. I'm just trying to make sure we don't jump from unknown to undeniable without a pit stop at let's examine the evidence. I hear you, I really do. The timing is wild, the plane crash tragic, and yeah, the military throwing up secrecy walls faster than you could say public relations disaster is definitely suspicious. But here's where you and I split on the chalkboard. You're connecting a lot of dots, but are we sure they're part of the same picture? A damaged plane doesn't automatically mean alien cargo, a heat signature in soil doesn't prove interstellar origins, and volcanic slag on a beach 40 years later, that's not exactly the Rosetta Stone of disclosure. Still, I'll admit this. The idea that something was jettisoned, fixed the craft, and then took off like it never happened, that's a detail you don't just make up. And the fact that Fred Crisman, of all people, was involved, that guy's like a recurring character in every Cold War conspiracy there is. So look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying if this really was a cover-up, they did a masterful job because all we're left holding are hot rocks, missing samples, and a whole lot of weird. Now, changing gears ever so slightly, tell me this, Doc. If they covered it up, was it just to keep the public calm or because what they found scared them more than it scared us?
You want to know if they covered it up to keep the public calm or because they were scared? How about yes? It's all of the above, Nellie. They weren't just afraid of mass panic. They were afraid of what this meant for power, for control. If a malfunctioning craft from somewhere else just dumped material over our backyard and took off like it was swatting a fly, that's not just a national security threat. That's a civilizational shift. Because the moment you admit we're not alone, and worse, that we're not in charge, the whole game changes. Military superiority, gone. Scientific authority, challenged. Religious worldviews, shaken. You don't just have a UFO in your sky. You've got a threat to the hierarchy in your hands. It's not just this case. Look at the pattern. Every time something credible gets to breaking through, eyewitnesses vanish, documents get redacted, explanations get convenient. So yeah, maybe that slag was just a lava rock, or maybe it was proof of a propulsion system so far ahead of ours it couldn't be allowed to exist on public record. Because if we didn't build it, then who did? And if they're flying over our cities, dumping whatever they want, and leaving us to pick up the pieces, who's really in control?
Now, there are a few things we certainly can agree on, Doctor. Neither one of us trusts the government or the official explanations they offer for anything. They've been caught lying to us over and over and over again. On this show, I've highlighted many of their lies and nefarious deeds, so I'm all on board the distrust the government train. Choo-choo. Heck, I'd apply to be the conductor if I could. We also agree that these men, especially Dahl and Arnold, really did see something, but this is a major point of deviation between us. If something was flying over Maury Island in 1947 and dumping molten metal onto boats, that's not nothing. But let me throw this back at you. What if you're asking the wrong question? You keep saying, if we didn't build it, who did? But I want to ask, could anyone have built it? Anyone, anywhere in this galaxy, and still gotten here? Let's do some math. The closest star system to Earth is Alpha Centauri. That's 4.37 light years away, which means even if you had a ship traveling at the speed of Voyager 1, our fastest spacecraft ever launched, it would still take over 76,000 years to make the trip. And that's not even factoring in food, fuel, radiation, or the lifespan of the crew. That's just math, that's physics. Now, sure, I know what you're thinking. Maybe they're way more advanced than us. Okay, fine, let's say they go 10 times faster. It's still 7,600 years. That's longer than human civilization has even existed. And let's talk about energy. Accelerating a physical craft to even 1% of the speed of light would take massive amounts of fuel. We're talking about entire planet-scale resources just to get it moving. Then there's stopping, maneuvering, shielding from micrometeoroids at relativistic speed. Doc, I'm not saying nothing happened. I'm saying the idea that someone flew here in a metal ship across millions of miles of dead space, dropped some space junk into Puget Sound and dipped, that's not just improbable. It's scientifically absurd, in my opinion. Last week I suggested that maybe we are being visited, just not from beings from another planet. Maybe they're not flying here in nuts and bolts craft like intergalactic tourists. Maybe there's something else entirely. What if the phenomenon is real, but the spacecraft part is just a mask?
Okay, Nellie, you're throwing physics at me like I haven't spent the last 20 years buried in propulsion theories and black-budget aerospace programs. Yeah, Alpha Centauri is 4 light years away. Yeah, Voyager would take 76 millennia to get there if we're using our tech, but who says they are? You're assuming the same limits that we operate under apply to them. That's like asking a caveman to explain Wi-Fi using rocks and smoke. We talk about distances and energy consumption and radiation shielding, but what if they're all irrelevant to a civilization that cracked the code on gravitational manipulation or inertial dampening or space-time folding?
Doctor, I hate to interrupt, but look at the data. These crafts, if that's what they are, aren't flying, they're disappearing and reappearing. They make 90-degree turns at Mach speeds, something that would kill any physical occupants. They're not burning fuel, they're bending the environment. That's not propulsion, that's something else entirely. I'll meet you in the middle a little bit. I'm not saying there is nothing physical about them at times, because they have left traces. They leave radar signatures. Pilots see them with their eyes and their instruments. I agree with you, that's not hallucination. That's interaction with the material world. I'm just not sold on them being visitors from outer space. I think they come from somewhere much closer, Doctor.
Somewhere much closer, huh? Well, that's interesting, Nellie. See, but you say that like it's some kind of comfort. Like if they're not from Alpha Centauri, but from just behind the veil, that somehow makes this easier to swallow. But I gotta be honest with you, that possibility that they're not coming from out there, but from right here, just slipping between layers of reality, that's not less scary, that's worse. Because if they're interdimensional, then that means they're not explorers, they're not even visitors, they're residents or neighbors, tenants in the same cosmic building, and we've been ignoring their knocking, or worse, mistaking it for the wind. And maybe that's why they don't land on the White House lawn. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe they're not crossing space, they're crossing perception, showing up just long enough to be seen, felt, sensed, and then gone. No warp drive, no hyperfuel, just there, and then not. But here's the kicker. If you're right, Nellie, they're not visitors, then all that secrecy, all that military response, all the denials, they're not covering up an arrival. They're covering up an ancient presence. So I'll ask you now, Nellie, if they've always been here, who really owns this planet?
Now we're asking the right questions. The Bible gives us dozens of examples of beings from the other side visiting the world as we know it. The first time, we have a very powerful one that took on a serpentine appearance for the sole purpose of deceiving and manipulating us. 3 chapters later in Genesis 6, other powerful beings cross over to this side, and we're told that they cohabitated with human women. They had offspring with them and brought hell on earth, resulting in a major response from another being from the other side. The ultimate being, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the creator of all things in this world and in that one. Seeing this evil, mutinous behavior, Yahweh flooded the world, purging it of its human-alien hybrids, alien in that they are not of this world, and sparing an unpolluted remnant of humanity that would start over. I, of course, go into greater detail of these events in the first 2 episodes that launched the show, but beings from that side, both good and bad, have continually visited this world and interacted with it, time and time again. In our previous episode, number 23, on the Flatwoods Monster, I demonstrated that even amongst ufologists, there is a growing number of them who are starting to conclude that these beings that people have labeled as aliens seem interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial.
So what are we to make of the Men in Black and the many attempted cover-ups?
Another great question, Doctor. This is actually going to get its own episode. I'd like to have you back for that one, the Men in Black episode, that is. I'm not convinced they are a part of a government cover-up. It's quite possible, just entertaining the idea, that they are working in tandem with these fallen beings to further muddy the water. The behavior they exhibited in Point Pleasant during the Mothman ordeal is highly unusual. Like they were simply someone or something trying to be human, but wasn't. But to be fair, our government and many others have seemingly attempted to muddy the waters just as much. Many times this has been to cover up their own dirty dealings and test flights of experimental craft. Next time we'll get more into the works of Dr. Hugh Ross, a Canadian astrophysicist and Christian apologist. His examination of the UFO phenomenon has greatly blessed and assisted me in my understanding and approach of these topics, and I think you'd highly respect and appreciate him as well. So again, many times the government has used UFOs and aliens as convenient smokescreens for their own activities, but I'm going to take it a step further. Please excuse the X-Files references I'm about to go into.
Your excuse. I love that show. I just didn't like you comparing me to Max Fennick.
My apologies once again, Doctor. In the X-Files series, in the main story arc, there are alien beings. They did crash in places like Roswell. They were discovered by the governments, and long story short, agreements were hatched, deals were made, information and technology were exchanged. It's fascinating to me because Second Temple Jewish literature, like the Book of Enoch, speak of similar exchanges taking place between humans and these fallen divine beings. Just as I believe multiple incursions occurred after the flood, hence why Nephilim can be found in the Holy Land post-flood, what if multiple exchanges have taken place over the years as well? Think about this, just a snapshot. 1870s, most Americans were still getting around by a horse. 1903, Wright brothers have the first powered flight. 1969, Apollo 11 lands on the moon. 1981, reusable shuttles enter regular use. History is full of these massive jumps in technological advancements. Not only that, it's still full of technological feats that we still can't explain, which may imply advancement, followed by destruction, then more advancements, different ones, but ones that always tend to expedite our destruction and the destruction of this world. Again, Enoch tells us the Watchers didn't just fall in love with human women. They brought gifts, forbidden knowledge, weapons, enchantments, metalwork, cosmetics, all sounding harmless until you realize it gave humanity tools we weren't ready to wield. In return, they got access, influence, even offspring, and gained a foothold in our realm. And those gifts weren't just random curiosities, they were enhancements of power, knowledge that bypassed the slow burn of wisdom. It was a shortcut to dominance wrapped in shiny packaging. War, vanity, control over life and death. The result? A world infected with hybrids, haunted by violence, and drowned under divine judgment. The flood wasn't just cleanup, it was quarantine. But here's the thing. I propose that those ancient deals didn't end in the flood. It's possible new arrangements were made. Behind military bases inside deep black projects signed not by kings, but now by generals. What if it's not Mount Hermon anymore, but Wright-Patterson, or Los Alamos, or Dulce, New Mexico? Think about it. We went from biplanes to bombers to rockets to microchips in under a century. The transistor was born just 2 years after Roswell. Fiber optics followed. Night vision, stealth tech, material sciences that feel like they were ripped out of a comic book. Now sure, call it coincidence, call it Cold War necessity, but I can't help but ask, what if we made a deal? What if in exchange for unimaginable tech, we gave permission? Maybe not openly, maybe not publicly, but in some subterranean meeting room under the Nevada desert, maybe someone said yes on our behalf. Yes to interference, yes to abductions, yes to further hybridization experiments, and yes to silence. The initial watchers who fell were dealt with severely by God, but no text says it was all of them. Maybe the watchers, or something akin to them, returned after the flood and never left. And maybe now, to cause confusion and to further conceal their involvement, they just rebranded.
I'm no demon, I'm your friendly neighborhood spaceman. Oh, Nellie, I don't say this often, but I think you just connected more dots for me in 2 minutes than most researchers manage in a lifetime. Perhaps you're right. Maybe the Book of Enoch isn't ancient mythology. Maybe it's a blueprint, a template for deception. Back then it was swords and enhancements. Today it's fiber optics and metamaterials. Let me throw this into the fire. Bob Lazar, the guy who claimed he worked at S4 just south of Area 51, he didn't just say we recovered a craft. He said the materials science inside the craft was beyond comprehension. Element 115 not on our periodic table when he first talked about it. Stabilized gravitational field, 0-point energy, all of it sounds like sorcery until you run it through a particle accelerator. And then there's Philip Schneider, the whistleblower who said he helped build deep underground military bases, and while tunneling in Dulce, New Mexico, they broke into something they weren't supposed to. He claimed a firefight broke out between Delta Force and, well, something else. Entities already occupying that space. He died shortly after. Suicide, they said, with rubber tubing and a catheter cord. And Paul Benowitz, the poor man, uncovered strange transmissions and anomalous craft right over Kirtland Air Force Base. The government didn't just silence him, they manipulated him, fed him false data, gaslit him until he was institutionalized, all because he got too close. These are different locations, different decades, different names, but they tell the same story. Something is being hidden, and it's not just a foreign threat. It's a presence, long-term, embedded, and perhaps buried under our very feet.
I gotta say, Doc, I'm not used to my guests agreeing with me on anything. I almost don't know how to react. You opened several cans of worms there, each deserving of its own episode, really. I think we can agree on one more thing. Once somebody has honestly looked at the overwhelming amount of accounts of UFOs, UAPs, and so-called aliens, you start to see it's not a theory anymore. You know, we're all about pattern recognition here. The moment we stop seeing these as isolated events and start treating them like chapters in the same dark history book, that's when the real picture starts to form. These aren't isolated incidents, they're breadcrumbs. And for too long, we've been acting like every crumb came from a different loaf. But when you zoom out, you start to realize this isn't a string of unrelated sightings or spooky campfire stories. This is a narrative unfolding, a controlled leak of reality. And like you said, Doctor, it's not just what's flying above us. It might be what's living below us. Deep underground bases, tunnels connecting military installations, whispers of joint operations between humans and something else. All things to come, to be sure. Some of you might be rolling your eyes back in your skull, and hey, that's fine. I think Dr. C and myself are used to that by now. But just like he said earlier, how many coincidences add up before they stop being coincidence? Patterns don't lie. They whisper, and then they shout. And at this point, the shouting, I think, is deafening. As for Maury Island and the event that took place above its waters, it's quite possible that Dahl saw something. If it left anything behind, I agree with Dr. Will here that any remains would have swiftly been collected to conceal the truth. Whether or not that truth is otherworldly, honestly, I don't know. I don't think we have enough information, but perhaps the most compelling thing for me is the fact that Dahl didn't have decades of stories to borrow from. It's easy to manufacture a UFO account today, just borrow from the thousands floating around on the internet. But Dahl didn't have that. He could have been incredibly creative, he could have been an incredibly good liar, or he simply could be telling us what he saw that day. And unless we get our actual hands on anything left behind by what he saw, we won't know if it was governmental or otherworldly. Either way, I could see why the government at the time would have wanted to put a lid on the whole thing. Which does lead us to 2 intelligence officers that died in this ordeal. 2 real deaths. The Kelso event adds tons of complexity to this entire ordeal. These men allegedly collected what was at Maury and died in an abnormal fire and/or crash, taking the stuff away. A crash that the government once again swiftly swooped in to deal with. Again, if they were working on secret tech, they wouldn't want anyone to know about it. But the Kelso crash could have been simply a tragedy. But I wouldn't put it past our government to want to tie up all loose ends, JFK style. Which, by the way, Fred Crisman, don't forget, did get subpoenaed in connection to that scandalous historical event as well. We can't close out this episode without talking about Ken Arnold's famous account. Remember, he was an experienced pilot that saw 9 objects going faster than anything we could make at the time. Honestly, these events don't have to be connected, Maury Island and Arnold's sighting above Rainier, though due to proximity of time and proximity of geography, I can see why many connect them. The speed and behavior of the crafts leads me to believe that perhaps they were not conventional hardware, if you catch my drift. Were they otherworldly beings? Were they crafts piloted by otherworldly beings? Oh, we're just getting started, folks. I want to thank Dr. Will C. for coming on the show today, and thank you for being so open-minded, Doctor.
Well, thank you for having me. I'd love to come back.
And I know I'd love to have you. I also want to thank my patrons. I hope you're enjoying the early access to these episodes. Those signed up on Patreon get Dancing Toaster episodes a week in advance. They get direct access to me, not that that's very impressive, and they get access to the member-exclusive show entitled The Man-Eating Toaster. We cover cults and true crimey things. We've covered 2 cults thus far, 4 episodes in. 2 true crime one-offs are coming this month. The first one will be on the nightmarish nun, Miriam Solakiotis. I hope I'm saying that right. She was a Greek Orthodox nun who was responsible for the deaths of possibly over 170 people. Some say it's a spicy one. She was a real woman, and she was real awful, and the story is sure to be nuts. I can't wait to bring it to you. After her, I'll be covering something a little darker, a little more mainstream, but I don't want to give too much away just yet. You can support my work at buymeacoffee.com/The Dancing Toaster, or you can sign up for the Patreon. $5 a month is all it takes to get you early access to the Man-Eating Toaster. As always, more could definitely be said. But we got plenty of time, folks. Plenty of episodes lie ahead. I hope you're as excited as I am. Come back next week and continue going further down the galactic rabbit hole with me. And perhaps Dr. Will C. will be with us. Go like, share, subscribe, leave me a review. Do all the things wherever you consume the Dancing Toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters. And don't let UFOs falling from the sky consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else will be taken from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for
Expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings.
maintaining 4,000 runway 8 kilo holding.
Not travel to areas affected by the attack or in a known area elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and avoid a gas at all times. Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident different from the attack in the event known perhaps we will continue to keep you informed.